What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of The Rift Rewind. This is an ESPN League of Legends show. We are live on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and the ESPN app. I'm Arda. We got Emily, Jacob, and Tyler with us as always. We got a lot to cover. Playoffs are upon us. LCS, LEC, LCK, LPL. We're going to cover it all here. But the most important thing that we will talk about is Valorant. And our new Valorant pro, Tyler Erzberger. He is leaving League of Legends entirely. He's going to focus 100% on Valorant. He's going to get good at the game. He's going to win a bunch of money. Tyler, any last words on the show?
It's been a great time here. I've really appreciated the last, 6-7 years in League of Legends. But, the last 3 days of playing Valorant have been absolutely mind-blowing. And to be perfectly honest, of the 3 days I've played, what I can talk about so far, the game is absolutely amazing. As someone who loves competitive video games and loves games of style like Persona 5, I think this is the perfect combination of gameplay and style. It is ridiculous, and not just from plebs like me who suck at FPS. Some of the best FPS players in the world, I can't name them. They'll show off their, stuff on Friday when the embargo lifts, but the entire weekend was the best players in the world playing this video game, and it was overwhelmingly positive. People were yelling at Riot to leave up the servers a little bit longer just so they could play a few more in-houses. It was that crazy. Just overall, it's going to be a huge game. It's going to be one of the most competitive games we've ever seen, and Riot knows it's going to be an esport. And if you suck at FPS and you don't like getting better at them, you might not like it. But if you really want to get better and you want to really play this game and try to give it your best, I think you'll love it. This game is going to be huge.
So Tyler gave you a good primer there. I am certain that we're going to have a lot of Valorant content coming up on this channel at twitch.tv/ESPN Esports, where you're watching us right now. Also on our YouTube channel and at ESPN.com/esports. Tyler leading the charge in terms of Valorant content and coverage. That's all going to come up. But we got a lot to talk about as it pertains to League of Legends. Let's start with the LEC. Let's start with the standings. Let's show you how it all shook down. G2, no surprise there, staying in the first position. But then you got the top three, really. Fnatic and Origen were flip-flopping back and forth there, Emily. But Mad Lions, fourth, and Misfits, number 5, as we round out the top 5 there.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like... Go ahead.
Oh, no, go for it.
I was just going to say, now we're looking at the bottom 5 there. Rogue is the surprise there as Excel, Schalke, SK, and Team Vitality missing the playoffs there. And actually, let's start with Rogue. They were the last team to make it. Tyler, they have the second least total deaths in the LEC with 152, while Origen leads that with 132 from this split. But they also have the lowest kills this split among playoff teams with 184. How much concern is there for Rogue going into the playoffs? Can they even make a deep run?
I believe they can make a deep run. I think if you look at the talent on the team, I don't think anyone would be surprised if they make a deep run to Origen in that kind of like third place quarterfinal match to, maybe play Fnatic or G2 in the semifinals. But this weekend was very, very difficult to watch as as one of the generals of the Rogue bandwagon, where this entire season, the early game has been so clean, and they've had mishaps in the mid game that kind of looked amateurish and kind of brought them off the trail. Like, their early game is still very strong. It's the strongest in the LEC going into this past weekend, and then they just kind of embarrassed themselves, losing to SK and Schalke. Schalke looking far better with their new lineup, but there's a lot to be concerned about. They did not look good online. Finn looked bad on Maokai and Aurelia, so I really hope that they can bring it together in the playoffs, because this team has the talent. They just need to show it in this online format.
Like we mentioned, they were the 6th ranked team, the last team going into the playoffs. They're also riding a 4-game losing streak. So I don't know if you believe in momentum, if the regular season doesn't matter and all that matters is the playoffs and everything is a clean slate there. But Mad Lions is a team that does have momentum, Emily, and they defeated Origen to remain in 4th, a very impressive win there. First new roster since leaving the Splice name. They get into the playoffs. Are you impressed? Are you impressed enough that you think they have what it takes to make a good playoff run?
So it was interesting listening to a lot of the interviews in LEC this past week where they asked some players who they thought kind of the most dangerous team going into playoffs is. And a few of them said Mad Lions. And I think the reason for that is because we still have no idea like how good they can be. We just know that they can be better than what they are now, which has been anything from like incredible moments of brilliance to like, typical things we expect from rookie teams and rookie players where they'll make mistakes around vision or they'll pick fights when they don't have, their item spikes correctly, or some of their drafting, especially like mid-season, was in my opinion a little suspect. So I think the big thing about Mad Lions and their victory over Origen is that it shouldn't be a shock to anyone who's watched this team, but the problem with Mad Lions, as always, is just that we cannot rely on them to be consistent, which is just another thing that often happens with a lot of these like teams that are just plucking, young talent and moving them up through Europe. So I think for Mad Lions, for me, what I'm really looking forward to with this roster is seeing them going into summer, presumably. And again, like something that we'll probably address maybe later in the show is that because there's a shorter break, it actually means that teams might be making less moves. And that aside, I don't see any reason why Mad Lions would change their lineup anyway. So with this lineup, another split to go through, I think they're going to be an incredibly formidable team. And I don't think anyone who has watched this team, this split, should be super surprised that they defeated Origen, especially since I still consider Origen to be a little bit slow and exploitable in their early game.
We're going to talk about Mad Lions. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I think Mad Lions is what Rogue want to be, right? And I think that or I guess the inverse is what we said previously in the season.
Yeah, I was gonna say you brought up before that like Mad Lions was like on the Rogue trajectory, so it's interesting to hear you say that, Jacob.
But I think they've surpassed them, right? So then that's why I say the inverse is I think that these are both teams who have sort of pulled up all these players from the European regional leagues and really sort of built around talent, focused on talent development, from a team environment perspective. And I think that in that regard, that Mad Lions has really sort of pushed forward in a way that Rogue has not been able to. And I think that for Rogue to be able to take the next step, they certainly need to be able to focus from a coaching perspective. I'd like to see them invest a little bit more out of the game as well. I don't think that necessarily the talent is the issue, but we've seen that in Mad Lions, and I think that that's the next step for Rogue.
So let's talk the playoffs then. Obviously, as we take a look at our playoff preview here, we have lots to talk about as it pertains to the LEC. G2 will be taking on Mad Lions, Fnatic versus Origen in the battle of that second place that's been raging all split long. In the losers brackets, it's going to be Misfits taking on Rogue, and that's where we stand. So let's first talk about G2 and Mad Lions, Tyler. This series is 1-1. G2 took week 1. Mad Lions took week 5. Mad Lions can beat G2, but will they be able to win a best of 5 series? I wonder, with that youth on the team and G2 with so much experience, is there any chance that we could see what many people would call an upset here?
No, there's no chance. I mean, yes. I mean, theoretically, I feel like the storyline's on the table, right? This super rookie group coming up, G2 going to be a bit maybe overconfident. I think the only way G2 loses the series if they beat themselves. G2, if they come in and they don't overlook Mad Lions and they take them seriously and they play to the best of their ability online in this format, G2 should win 3-0. There should be no question about it. They are more experienced. They're more talented. All around, they are a better team. But if G2 does come in a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant, play some troll picks, maybe, try to play around, maybe Mad Lions steals one and then it, shifts the other way and we see a shocked and a confused G2 try to save themselves and they get knocked out. That's the only way I see G2 losing. If G2 takes this seriously, it should be a 3-0, no question, no doubt. Sorry, Mad Lions, you're a very good team, but G2 is a world-class team.
Emily, if you're Mad Lions, do you prefer making your LEC playoff debut without a crowd, being such a young team?
maybe. I mean, there could be like positives and negatives to both of them, right? Because if you're like, I can't speak for the Mad Lions players, but typically if a lot of younger teams can get nervous from a crowd standpoint, but they also can draw and feed on that, right? I do think it's kind of good for Mad Lions to face G2 first. And by that, I mean, like, I feel like they can go in, no one's expecting them to win, right? So they're basically playing with house money. We've seen them have some really good game plans against G2 early, which is, again, where I think, like, if you're looking at where to attack G2, I definitely think it's in the early game, and I definitely think it's through like spreading them on the map still. Historically, some of the things that G2 has struggled with in terms of multiple TP or global comps, and then really, really aggressive early jungle pathing from like their opponent. I think those still can hold true for G2 in this playoff, especially if you can manage to attack them bot side. However, like if I'm Mad Lions, I'm going in, I'm like, you know, we kind of know how we want to play against G2. We have nothing to lose in this matchup. And I think that's actually, even if they do lose this series, which I am also not picking Mad Lions to win this, despite the fact that I just talked about how they could. I'm definitely picking G2. I also think that regardless of the loss, they can probably draw a lot of confidence from this matchup if they can manage to, you know, take a game or two off of G2.
I think the big thing, right, is, so first, Tyler, I don't think you're giving it. I actually do think that they're a really good. I know that, look, like I know that G2 is the best team in Europe, and I'm not even going to, won't go as far to say that Mad Lions could win this series, because I don't think that's true. But I do think that Mad Lions at least can take a game, and maybe two. But I do think that Mad Lions is very competitive against everyone in the LEC. I think that the way that they play sort of lends themselves to be incredibly competitive, and I think that the big thing for me is that this will be a series that is definitely a G2 win, but it will be a little bit closer than I think most people would give it credit for. My prediction is 3-1.
Yeah, I think many of us made that prediction. We're going to get to our bracketology in just a little bit here, but actually, let's move on to the next matchup. What we'll do is we're going to save our entire predictions for the bracketology. All of us filled out our brackets all the way to the winner, by the way. So we're going to get to that for the LEC and LCS. But let's move on to Fnatic versus Origen. This is a fun one. 10-4 series total for Fnatic going back to 2015. It was 1-1 this regular season. Origen took week 1. Fnatic took week 5. And you got to, I mean, this is an appropriate matchup to me, Tyler, that we see these two battling it out. I think they're going to battle it out twice with the losers bracket. I think one will make a run. We might see this matchup twice in this playoff, but based on what you've seen, who in this matchup really has the edge?
I think Fnatic has the edge. I think if you ask most analysts, most pundits, I think Fnatic has a heavy edge, especially after Origen's last few games. And I think we've seen this entire split, and we slow is not bad. I mean, I've said this time and time again. You can be a counter-punching player in a team, but you have to have more than just that in your sleeve. You have to play fast when needed. And I think we've seen the last few weeks that Origen has been pushed a little when it comes to picking outside the box, you know, not letting Alphari play Renekton every single game and kind of putting them on different picks. It has shown that they are susceptible to being dethroned and to being, you know, dispatched pretty easily. Like, I think Origen coming into the series, it's all about if they can adapt. Because we know Fnatic can adapt. They can play weird picks. They know how to play around the map. They know how to be a more aggressive style. They can play a faster game. They can play a slower game. I don't really have any questions about Fnatic as a team and what styles they can bring. For me, this series is all about, can Origen adapt? Have they just been playing coy the entire season, waiting for the playoffs to be more flexible with their drafts, with their style? If they are, this will be a banger of a series. This will go 5 games. But if we're shown that Origen can only play this counter-punching, slow style, build around upset in the late game, this could be a very quick series where I think Fnatic could take it in 3 or 4 games.
Emily, Fnatic was completely trolling against Vitality, but those role swaps are going to totally hold up in the playoffs, right? They're going to totally
Let's
make
go.
those changes.
Let's go, Hilly Top. No, I think it was I had fun watching that. I don't know how many other people did. I thought it was pretty entertaining. I think the thing for me with Fnatic, and I know I sound like a broken record because I've talked about Fnatic a lot this year, is that for like, as opposed to last year where we still saw them adapt, and in my opinion they were one of the only teams that could exploit some of G2's weaknesses, especially in the early game, and we saw that when they faced each other in playoffs, especially in summer. I think that this year's Fnatic is, despite the fact that they're in a very similar position, which I would say is just behind G2, I think that they are so much more flexible. They seem a lot more malleable. They seem to be, and again, this is all like presumption because I don't know the team environment, but the team itself seems to be a lot more willing to work together than some of the internal struggles that they talked about at Worlds last year that happened throughout all of 2019. And I just think that they're so much better about like transferring their pressure. So even if they are over focusing on one side, like say they're going top, right? Whippo will then sometimes TP bot and transfer that pressure to bot lane. They just seem a lot more willing to help each other on the map. They seem a lot more unified. I know I've identified Selfmade as kind of one of those reasons why that's the case. I do think he's a really strong voice for them, especially early. So even though I would still put Fnatic like right below G2, so in standings, I haven't changed my mind on where they were compared to last year. I think they're just such a better team than they were previously in 2019, and I want to see them continue to grow. I definitely think they have more options than Origen does right now in terms of play style and in terms of what they can have their players do. So I don't think it'll be a sweep, but I agree that I think Fnatic is going to take this.
Okay, Jacob, let's make the case for Origen then. They did lead the league in KD with 1.59. Make the case that Origen can win the series. How would they do it?
I think that they have to focus a lot on bot lane, right? I think one of the things that we've seen Fnatic do quite well this year is, or this split so far, has been playing around Reckless. Seems unlocked. To Emily's point about sort of lack of cohesion in previous Fnatic teams, a lot of that was centered around Reckless, and that certain players had issue with Reckless, right? And Broxa was among those. That there was somewhat tension, and I don't care what he says. There certainly was. Certainly, I think that now with Selfmade, it feels like people are coming around, and I said this on last week's show, and I'll stick to it. It's easy to like each other when you win. So I think that's sort of where Fnatic's at right now, is like they're the second most consistent team in the league, and therefore they're like getting along, which they certainly weren't in the same way last year. I think that the big thing for Origen is that I don't think that Origen's there yet, but I think that if there's any way that they're going to get there and beat Fnatic, I think that it is focusing around bot lane. And I don't like the word tilt, and I don't think that would be the proper thing to use here, but to sort of dislodge the Fnatic game plan, which has been play around Reckless, unlock his potential to be one of the best AD carries in the world, and let him run wild, right? And that has been the way Fnatic has played well this year at their highest peak, and you see that both in his stats and team stats. But I think that the big thing is that if you can dislodge that, if you can be Xerxes, and if you can be Xerxes and the rest of Origen, and you can really that bottom lane and mess up that rhythm, that's the way you beat Fnatic. And I think that's the big thing that they would have to do this weekend.
Origen, by the way, also second longest average game time at 35 minutes. Let's go to that losers bracket matchup. Misfits taking on Rogue. Rogue won the season series 2-0, won in week 1 and week 5. Fun fact, these teams have played each other in week 1 and week 5 in the last 3 consecutive splits. They have a 3-3 overall head-to-head record. Misfits were in first in week 4, Emily. They were 6-2. They did not secure that position, obviously. But what happened? I mean, why did they fail to stay in the top 4?
I mean, I think when we look at this matchup between Misfits and Rogue, as you pointed out, Rogue has the head-to-head in 2-0 over Misfits this split, and that was actually like super important in terms of going into playoffs. I think that in both of their matchups, Rogue, just to start off, Rogue did have better drafting, if I remember correctly, in both of those games. But then additionally, if you're looking at how each of these teams play, when I look at Misfits, I look at jungle mid, right? Like it's all about how much pressure can Febiven get on picks like the Azir and then transfer that around the map along with Razork. Although I think like Denick is still really, really good. I think their bot lane is probably the weakest side of them. Whereas when I look at Rogue, I'm actually still looking at their solo laners, but it's a little bit different about how they're going to be playing around pressure and how they're going to be bringing it to their side lane coverage. So I believe in Rogue a bit more, and more specifically, if I'm comparing their top sides, I believe in Rogue's ability to transfer that pressure to the rest of the map more than I believe in Misfit's ability to do so. And I think
Jacob,
that's really what this matchup is going to come down to.
Jacob, do you think Misfits can handle that Rogue pressure?
I think it's too early to tell at this point, right? It's another team with a lot of young. Really sure how they will do in playoffs. I believe a lot in Razork and Denick. I think that they proved a lot of people wrong about them. You know, when we reported free agency that they were joining this team, people were like, "Who?" Right? Like there was a resounding like random Spanish league players that no one like Spanish European regional league players that nobody cares about. Right? Like even on the show, like we couldn't even get assets for them because like there's just like a small amount of English language footage of these players other than masters, and like it was kind of hard to get everything put together when we thought that there was a chance they'd get picked up. And so like
in fairness,
yeah, I think that
I did reach out to my Spanish league friends and they knew exactly. So
I think anyone
that is one cool thing about Europe in general.
I think that anyone who's like super hardcore into the EUM ERL scene like definitely knew who they were, but like the average fan of the LEC or of Misfits are like, who? Right? Like they were resounding confusion. I think that Razork has definitely evolved and matured as a player over the span of the past 3.5 months since being on this team and playing on the big stage. I do think they may benefit a little bit from being online in this playoff series because that pressure is not the same as it would be if you were on the stage. It's definitely turned up a little bit more than it has been in online regular season games, but I think that it will not be the same as if they were in studio on stage. So I don't know. This is the hardest matchup to call in the playoff bracket for me, in my opinion, looking at the early matchups. But I certainly think that I have high hopes for this Misfits team moving forward. Obviously, they improved from like the super team we thought they would be last season that crashed and burned miserably. And so one step further right now. So I certainly think we're on a good trajectory here.
Two dangerous words when analyzing a competitive team: on paper. On paper. Perfectly describes last season, I suppose. Tyler, I do have a question for you. Rogue won the season series 2-0, right?
Mm-hmm.
But of course, those games were on LAN. We're online now. Taking that into consideration also, how much stock do you give to the regular season games? How much does that factor into your analysis, thinking, okay, Rogue won the season series, so how much weight do you put on that for Rogue to win the playoff games?
I mean, the game is still the same. It's not like it's the NFL, right? And everyone's playing with, something else but a football. They're still playing League of Legends at the end of the day. It's a different environment, but it's still the same game. I will say, though, that Rogue did look very lost last weekend, so I would put a lot more stock on just how they looked going into the playoffs. I still think Rogue's going to win. I'm going to hitch myself to this bandwagon until it goes off the rails completely and falls off the cliff, because I'm going down off the ship with these guys. I believe in Rogue. I think Larson, in the battle of kind of the mid-lane superstars or budding superstars, if you want to say. I mean, Febiven already had his peak on Fnatic, and now he's kind of reinvented himself on Misfits. I believe in Larson. Larson, for me, is a player that I've always kind of liked since the amateur scene, and I think he's been very good this season. So if Rogue's going to win this,
Before we get to our bracketology, which we will get to in just a second, Chat, and Jacob, you're involved here as well. Maybe you can lead this here. We're having a big conversation about Fnatic, in particular Reckless. Naja fan says, I think Reckless is heavily overrated, but I've thought that for years. So I know that's a contentious view of mine. Jacob, you've responded to this as well, but let's just go around the horn. Do you agree with this? Like, this is a pretty big statement being made in chat here.
I think Reckless is inconsistent. That would be the word I would use. Not overrated. I think that he is a somewhat like Doublelift, actually, who has to be set up in a certain way, both in-game and out. And so what I was saying in chat is that I think this is the best roster Reckless has had around him to enable him, not the best roster based on skill, but to enable him since the Huni Reignover Forbidden roster of Fnatic. I think that the 2018 Fnatic roster was better than the Huni Reignover Forbidden Fnatic. Obviously, they went to the World Finals. However, as it pertains to Reckless and enabling his playstyle, that is the best one, right? And I think that the big thing with Reckless is that he has to have a certain set of circumstances to be unlocked. I think that this current Fnatic roster does a good job at unlocking those circumstances in a way that last year's Fnatic roster did not. That is my take.
What are those circumstances, though? Look, actually, one comment in chat says, and this is from Yax1, Reckless is best when he is the second or third threat on the team. So I guess maybe when the spotlight is not shined on him and he's not the number one line of attack or maybe counted on the most. Tyler, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to look at the Fnatic of 2015 that, went undefeated, he wasn't really the star. It was Huni. Huni was the one who... Yep. He was the one, it was the Huni and Reignover show, back when people were like, oh yeah, like, these two are both amazing world-class players, and then Reignover kind of went on his own, and we were saying, oh, it was a lot of the brains of Reignover and the brawn of Huni, and that kind of was the spearhead of the Fnatic team, with Reckless in the bottom lane, kind of, doing his part in cleaning up. I think Reckless is properly related. I think he's a top 10 AD carry of all time. I've made this statement before. I think he is a legend of the game. But if you're saying if every LEC player was wiped from their team and we had to do a fantasy draft, would he be in the first 5 players I select to build a team around? Probably not. I think he's top 10, but I don't think he'd be my top 5 of players if I'm building around a team. I think there's a few better choices who are more flexible.
Emily,
I agree with that.
Some of the comments, Emily, that people are saying that is Reckless doesn't kind of take over games like some other AD carries have, but Reckless is always online when Fnatic need him to be. So he's relied upon, but he's not the one to take over. Do you agree with that?
So, I mean, I think the thing I want to go back to in terms of talking about underrated, overrated is you really have to pay attention to how Fnatic could use the resources around Reckless. And going back to that Huni Reignover team that Tyler mentioned, one thing that people fail to mention a ton about Huni is that guess what? He is TPing bot side. He is TPing into fights, and he is transferring his pressure. And this is something that Huni ends up getting punished for a lot, but I also think it's one of his strengths. So it's like a double-edged sword thing, and it's one of the reasons why he looks so inconsistent at times is because he always wants to transfer his pressure around the map. And when he was on Fnatic, he was pretty consistently trying to transfer it bot lane to Reckless. And that's where I think Reckless fits really, really well in the system to the chat point, where he's not necessarily going to be relied on to be the end-all be-all carry, but they're going to funnel those resources into him. They're going to be giving him side waves, right? We had an entire split where Reckless's main job, if people remember, was to split push as a side lane AD carry. Does anyone else remember that but me? It's really interesting how Fnatic have always used their pressure around Reckless. And so I think in a discussion like this, that's something that we really, really need to bring up. And again, it's one of the reasons why I really like this Fnatic team now, because I think that if you're going to attack this Fnatic, you actually want to attack mid jungle. You don't want to over focus on one of their sides.
Jacob,
I do think, quick thought here. Good point about Huni and sort of his pressure and how it impacted the rest of the match. That's the big difference between last year and this year is that Selfmade also is it can also pick up that carry role. In the chat, he said Reckless is a very good cleanup AD carry. Yes, he is. He is maybe one of the best AD carries in the world at that. Is the fact that he is good at positioning. He's good at follow-up, but he shouldn't always be the one that has to initiate and always has to be the one that makes the big play. I think that's what Reckless is really good at. But I do think that's why I think this Fnatic team is better than last year's Fnatic team. Because of that alone.
Whippo was transferring his pressure a lot around the map better because he
Exactly,
they've done a good job to like get him ahead in the laning matchups, and then he can transfer pressure elsewhere. So
Chat is enjoying this conversation. Feel free to continue it and send questions. I'm going to get to as many of them as possible. Let's get to our bracketology. We all filled out our brackets. By the way, we also did this for the LEC. I'm going to start. Here is my bracket. Here's who I think will win. Surprise, surprise. Shocking prediction of the Sench. It is G2. What a shock. However, I do think that Origen and Fnatic will meet twice, and I think they're going to be close games, but Fnatic will in fact win both games. But it's going to be an El Clasico type situation, G2 and Fnatic in the end, but G2 will cruise to another championship win. That is my bracket. Let's move on to Tyler's bracket. Tyler, talk to us about your bracket.
I have also G2 over Fnatic in the final. I think the only biggest difference I have between most of you guys' bracket is that I do believe in Rogue. I believe in Rogue. I think Rogue, at their peak, at their best, they are better than every other team in the league except the top two. So I am believing in Rogue that they will get in a hot streak. I feel like this is a team that does go off momentum. When they are rolling, I feel like this team gels really well. I want to see Finn. I want to see Larson. I want to see Inspired. I want to see these guys run through the bracket. I don't know if they can beat a Fnatic or a G2, but I do think they can beat Origen. I do think they can beat Mad Lions. I do think they can beat Misfits. So I have Rogue winning 3 in a row, then losing to Fnatic, and then finally G2, the Kings of Europe, the second place team in the world. They will win another championship for Mr. Carlos over there.
Emily, what do you got?
So I have I feel like I picked like a lot of messy series. Like I'm expecting this to be a lot messier than you guys because I think I have a lot more like 3-2s. The main difference I want to say in my bracket from your two is that I have Mad Lions beating Rogue and what I expect to be a really, really close series. But again, like what I said about Mad Lions is that I do agree with some of the player assessment in the LEC that they are one of the more dangerous teams coming into this. So even though I do expect them to fall to G2, I actually think that they could do some damage in the losers bracket. But then again, I have G2 facing Fnatic in the winners bracket, Fnatic dropping down, and then Fnatic coming back up to face G2 again. Historically, when we've seen these teams meet in finals, I think Fnatic always adjusts enough to at least make it a 3-2, which is what I expect to come out of this spring as well.
Jacob?
Yeah, so in my bracket, I have Lions prevailing. Or even if Misfits is the one that makes it through, I could see them prevailing over Misfits. I think they're better than Misfits or Rogue right now. I think that Misfits and Rogue have been on a little bit of a downward trajectory at the tail end of the season here, even though they still qualified for playoffs. Everything else for me, not that surprising. I actually do think the Origen Fnatic matchup, which I do hope we get in the semifinal of the LEC playoffs, will be very, very close. But I do think that the games between Fnatic and G2 will go G2's way, with Fnatic taking one game in each series. I don't know. I think that we will get Fnatic Origen twice. I think we'll get G2 Fnatic twice. And I think that Fnatic and Origen are really the most interesting part of this bracket, in my opinion, because I think that those teams are much closer than people would give them credit for. I think some people think that Fnatic is cut above, but I think that they're actually pretty damn close to one another, and we'll see how they fare out. I do hope we get to see them both in Match 2 and in the semifinal.
Feel free to let us know in chat what you think the LEC final will be. Give your prediction as well. Does anyone in chat think G2 will not win? We all think in a sweep, it's going to be G2 and Fnatic in the final. Does anyone disagree?
Chat seems to think that G2 is overrated, which, like, I don't think they're going to 3-0. That's a little strong, but we'll see.
Well, we said 3-1, most of us anyway, in the final. I said 3-1, and I think there was 1-3-2. I think it might have been Emily. But those are our thoughts. Let us know what you think. We're going to move on to the LCK. Gen.g and T1 are going to be playing. Maybe a preview of the LCK finals. T1 swept Dragon X in week 6, only dropped one game to Hanwha Life and picked up 3 wins. Tyler, This looks like a tantalizing matchup. Gen G has been on top all along. T1 in hot pursuit. How much are you looking forward to this matchup?
I am super excited for this matchup, and I think the biggest curveball that we didn't see coming last week is that T1 is now half starting their rookie player Elam in the jungle role over Cuz. Cuz did come back in their last series to kind of clean up and take over and kind of bring that veteran leadership in and kind of close out a series, but he's been starting some important matches for T1 against Dragon X and some of these better teams. And from Coach Kim's interviews with Coach Kim, the T1 head coach, he's been talking about how Lim gives them more of an aggressive approach in the early game. Him and Kana also have a much better synergy. Kana has looked a lot better with Alim in the game. So two training players kind of having that built-in synergy, which is easier for a younger player to kind of build off of. So for me, the series is really interesting because you have Clid, the ex-girlfriend of T1 kind of leaving the team, basically kind of in not the nicest fashion. I mean, he basically just straight up said, like, yeah, I like these guys more than the T1 guys. Like, I get along with BDD and Rascal and Ruler, and I feel more comfortable with the Gen G guys than the T1 guys. So I think jungle is where I'm really watching in the series. It's going to be Clid versus either Cuz or Lim. I really kind of want to see Lim play this series because I want to see the two, fast-paced junglers go at it. And I'm really curious of seeing how far T1 could go if Lim really does break through, because from the small data points we do have from him, he's been very good. He's had one poor game, but he's been very strong most of his series so far last week. I'm very impressed by him so far.
Emily, Gen G, cautiously optimistic. Why?
Just because, like, historically, and here's, again, like, one of the unprecedented things about this T1 season is that it's the first year that they don't have Coma, right? So we're trying to figure out how many of these playstyle things are due to Faker, who is, like, their most veteran player on the team, or whether it was due to Coma or maybe his coaching staff. And historically, T1 has had a pattern of bringing in some more aggressive rookie junglers, and then it hasn't worked out so well, and it's affected their career. Blossom. So I think I do think Elam has looked good. I am cautiously optimistic about it for that reason, because I think if T1 start struggling against Gen G, then they will just play Cuz. They will just default to kind of the classic T1 style that we're used to, where they're trying to, focus top early to kind of transfer that pressure on the rest of the map, have a bot lane that can either play weak side or just generally go even, scale until late, and have Faker controlling, like, kind of the mid-jungle duo. So I think that is what I'm looking for from this Gen G matchup. I think Gen G is going to take it because I think Clid and BDD are just playing out of their minds right now, and I really think that is going to be the main difference maker. I also think a jungler like Clid, I've seen even early on in his career, he was able to exploit a lot of LPL junglers when he had less experience than he does now. So I do think that he'll be able to exploit some of the flaws in Elam's pathing, similarly to what we've seen him do across his career.
Gen G, by the way, has yet to lose a game since going online. They crushed the week. They beat Damwon, Afrika Freaks, and Griffin 2-0 each. Before we move off the LCK, pick a matchup upcoming this week that you're personally looking forward to and why. Tyler, let's start with you.
I mean, I would have to go look at the schedule, but I'll have to see one matchup. If you give me a second, I will tell you what LCK matchup.
I have mine.
Yeah, go ahead. Let me while I look at the schedule.
Dragon X. I'm just as shocked as you guys are that KT Rolster has decided to do well going forward in the split. They're currently on a kind of insane win streak that I never expected to happen. And Dragon X have looked, kind of shaky in their online play so far. So despite the fact that they did end up beating Griffin, which everyone kind of cites as the grudge match, but because the ex-Griffin players and CB Max going to Dragon X, I think I'm really curious because I'm kind of waiting as a KT fan. I'm like super harsh and down on them. Like they're the only team I'm actually like very emotionally invested in as a team. And I don't know, like they should have it, but it's so hard for me to believe in KT. And so this is kind of the highlight matchup for me for that reason. Can like Dragon X is facing Sandbox earlier in the week. Can they kind of regroup for that going up against KT? And then, you know, KT have like kind of skyrocketed up the ranks in like mid first round through their play in the second round.
Naja fan says, "Get excited for KT! Everyone
No,
get
don't
excited!"
get excited for KT. Stop it! Stop it!
It's in all caps, by the way.
Emily Rand will always get excited for KT.
No, she won't. No, she won't. She's very pessimistic about KT. Always.
She's like a fan of the get excited when you hit the roof.
Arda, I have my matchup.
Everything and them to go to Brooklyn instead of New York, but that's true. Yeah.
So that's the pessimistic part. What's the optimistic side, Tyler?
So my matchup that I'm most excited for coming up this weekend is it does have Gen G. It's Gen G versus Dragon X. It's everyone knows about me. I'm annoyingly fanboyish and hyperbolic about three players. Obviously, there's Faker, who I've written about ad nauseum probably 10,000 times in my career. The other two are BDD and Chovy, who I've championed since they've started as rookies as, you know, the next Faker. And now you have Dragon X with Chovy, who's been playing lights out, who has been the star of the team, who has really, even to Emily, and me and Emily have had debates last year of when I was a Chovy stan. I was like, Chovy's one of the best players in the world. And she was like, he needs to become more well-rounded. I think we can both agree now that Chovy is becoming that well-rounded, superstar, world-class, top 5 kind of player. And BDD, as we've talked about, is playing lights out. Both these players are kind of at their peak right now, and I'm very excited to see what happens when these two players play against each other. Because I think BDD, Faker, and Chovy right now are all playing at like a super high level, and I don't think we've ever had a time in the LCK where we've had 3 mid laners play at, you know, 10 out of 10 peak. Maybe back in the Dade Faker days.
I was gonna say Dade era, like 2014.
Yeah, like Pawn, Dade, and Faker. Maybe that era was the last time we had like 3 king mid laners all playing at like a 10 out of 10 like status, and it kind of just speaks to how crazy it is that Pawn and Dade are both retired, and Faker is still playing at that 10 to 10 level with these two kids, Chovy and BDD, who both grew up watching Faker. So now we have this wild, like 5 years later, 6 years later actually, time skip where Faker's still at the top, and he has these two kids who both grew up watching him trying to take his crown. So those three players...
LeBron James thing, right?
Yeah, it's LeBron James. It's just like LeBron James, where LeBron James is now watching the kids who grew up, you know, idolizing him, now trying to take his throne. And I think this season for me is all about can Faker retain his throne, because BD and Chovy are playing as well as they've ever played, and they're both evolving every week. It seems like BD and Chovy are both just getting better and better and better, and it seems like Faker, as we've seen, like he had an angry Azir game last week. He was just destroying every one of his Azir. Like Faker is locked in, and PDD and Chovy are both playing so well. Those three players are just playing on another level right now than any other mid laner that I've watched in any league.
Before we move on to the LPL, Emily, Naja fan, and Flashy agrees with this. Longtime chat person, Flashy. Appreciate you being here. Chovy's the best top laner in the world. Don't at me. What say to that?
You know, it's fun to watch players flex. So sure, why not?
He's practicing top lane.
So. You know why I want to come back to transition to LPL? Zoom, because JDG are in trouble right now.
So let's go to the LPL. You're watching Rift Rewind, an ESPN League of Legends show. We are live every Tuesday on Twitch, on Twitter, on YouTube, and the ESPN app. Also at espn.com/esports is where you can find our ESPN League of Legends power rankings. And we have a new number 1 after G2 Esports and Gen G dominating that 1 and 2 position. Gen G still at number 2, but we have a brand new number 1. And it is not E-Star, believe it or not. Somehow, some way. E-Star, not number 1. It is Fun Plus Phoenix since moving online. How come FPX, Emily, getting that number 1 position?
I mean, I think there are a few things going on with FPX. I mean, to like clarify, not to dunk on our own power rankings, but I think they mean a lot less considering this is the only week where both both LCK and LPL teams were on there. So it's been kind of a wonky thing for power rankings in general. So I'm not really sure how much it means that FPX is on top. However, FPX, we saw them finally trot out Con for the first time. Again, it was against Victory 5, worst team in the league. So I don't know how much that means to people, but it did give kind of an early blueprint of how they can kind of succeed with Con and the issues that will still be present when Khan is on the team and how much attention he kind of does need topside. However, my counterpoint to that is that it's not like Gimgoon wouldn't have some of those problems, because we also saw OMG come out with a really good game plan against Gimgoon in the top lane, where they pretty much just dove him over and over and over again and managed to take a game off of FPX. So I think we're seeing blueprints both from teams in terms of how they're trying to prep to deal with FPX, and also FPX really still trying to find a way that Khan can start for this team and he can fit into their existing system. So it's a work in progress.
Emily, of course, has a Friday night LPL show that happens every single Friday on this channel live. Pick a matchup in the next 7 days, Emily, that you're really looking forward to, and why?
RNG E-Star. I know that RNG are kind of like fallen a lot in people's estimation, but I am really looking forward to this matchup. And then the week ends, I believe. Oh no, there's one more day after it. But there is a FPX top esports matchup as well on Saturday. So like late Friday night for the US. Or super early Saturday morning. So it'll be really interesting.
So for those that are hearing about your LPL show on Fridays for the first time, what can people look forward to?
I am still trying to decide this week whether I want to do a guest or whether, since I keep receiving a ton of questions about FPX, if I just want to do an FPX review of Tion's jungle pathing with Khan versus with Gimgoon and talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each. So if you want to let me know on Twitter which one you'd like to see, go for it, because I actually still haven't decided which one I want to do.
Also, let us know in the chat, and we'll relay it back to Emily. It's at League of Emily, by the way, on Twitter. Let's transition now on the Rift Rewind to the LCS. We now have our playoff set after a wild Monday tiebreaker. Here is the recap in case you missed it. There it is right there. Immortals, see ya later. Xsmithy, goodbye. Out of the playoffs. Dignitas fared well in that matchup, but didn't fare so well in the end. Golden Guardians getting into the playoffs, and 100 Thieves riding high as well. Evil Geniuses, what a march they had. We'll get to that in a little bit. By the way, this was the second most tiebreakers in LCS history, tied for second with 4. Spring 2018 had 5. So Golden Guardians, Emily, securing 6th place. How did this happen?
So, I mean, I think my big thing that I've been saying about Golden Guardians as early as their loss to C9, when C9 ran that like really cool Pantheon comp, is that they have actually looked better in this latter half of the split, even in their losses. I think they've looked a lot more cohesive. They've had a stronger understanding of what they want to do and how they want to play. And I think even in the losses that they did have, they showed marked improvement from where they were previously in the split. The main difference is that they do have Huhi, who is just not only has played the support position a bit longer than Keith, but also has a wealth of understanding. When he was a mid laner, I defended his intuition around side lane split pushing and pressure. I think he has a really strong understanding of side lanes in general. And I'm not going to credit him for the team suddenly looking better, but I do think once they swapped to him, they were able to have another veteran voice on the lineup, and that really, really helped. Not to take away anything from Keith, because I think Keith looked significantly improved when he wasn't on Tom Kench. So, I think he did a good job of what they asked of him, since they did ask him to start. But the main difference for me on this Golden Guardians lineup is just the addition of Huhi, and the fact that a bunch of stuff needed to fall into place for Golden Guardians to make it, but they also had to do their part, and they did their part.
Jacob, I will say we were very critical of Keith early in the season. And now what Emily is saying there looks like he was able to right the course and contribute here.
Yeah, they swapped him. So I would say like, Keith deserved the criticism. I think the one person I kind of want everyone on this panel's opinion of is Golden Glue. Obviously, at the beginning of the season was the sole North American-born mid laner in the LCS. Pobelter obviously later picked up by CLG. But do we think Golden Glue's redeemed himself in a way, right? Like this seemed like it was a little bit of a last shot for him, and my opinion would be yes, he has. More than serviceable. I wouldn't say the best player on this team by any stretch of the imagination, but like held his own as they got progressively better. So yeah, I mean, I think Golden Glue deserves to continue to play on this team, even if they lose the series and they're one and done out, right? Like one matchup and out in playoffs. Like I would keep him through summer and continue to use him until he gives me a reason not to. But I certainly think that he made good on his shot. Thoughts, everyone?
I mean, I think I would agree with your assessment. I think Golden Glue has been like more than serviceable, not like insane, like he's having this most phenomenal split of his life. But again, I think having who he is like a veteran voice on the team, and I am gonna keep returning to that because I think it's pretty important. I think it's kind of tied the team together in a way that he probably doesn't have to worry as much about maybe some early to mid-game shot calling, and that can be more of a closer who-he thing. I still think he needs to work on his synergy with closer. I wouldn't say they're like the best, most synergistic mid-jungle duo. However, in terms of like, has Golden Glue like failed? No, like not by any stretch of the imagination.
I think, okay, so chat is really kind of grinding the axe on the Golden Guardians management for lack of support around Keith in the role swap. Look, like I think this goes both ways, and just full disclosure here, like I got a lot of flame for going on a certain competitor talk show and flaming to his face the director of Golden Guardians for blaming his players his first split is that in that job. But I think that, you know, I think that management could have done a better job of the expectation of him for Keith, right? But I also think it's partly on Keith because he could have said no and then gone and played AD carry probably on an academy team. So I think that he wanted to remain in the LCS, and so obviously this makes a lot of sense for him because that keep it in the LCS. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fair that criticism is deserved by both parties, him and management, for how things eventually worked out and him being benched.
Before we move off of Golden Guardians, Tyler, I find it interesting that we're talking about Golden Glue as somebody that may not, like, the vibe I'm getting here is that Golden Glue is still on a short leash in a way that maybe he might not have the full summer to play on Golden Guardians, which I find interesting because I know before the season we were talking about Golden Glue. Maybe this is the last chance that he's going to get as a regular LCS starter, but it's going to be his best chance. And we also talked about how he's a scrim god and he's so good playing online. Like if the summer presumably continues online, hasn't he done enough this split to show that he's worthy of his spot? Like, are we already thinking that he might be somebody that's on the chopping block if Golden Guardians don't do well in the first few games of summer?
I mean, the one thing is I don't see any way Golden Glue does get benched because they couldn't import anyone. It's kind of hard to import anyone kind of right now in this current climate. And I really do think if Golden Glue wasn't a North American born mid laner, I don't know if we'd be having these conversations. He's been more than suitable, as we've been talking about. Like, they don't make the playoffs without Golden Glue. Like, his Zoe play in the last game got them to the playoffs.
Yeah.
He was the one who was hitting those trouble bubbles and getting those sleeps and getting those kills when they were on the back foot. He has not just been carried by his teammates to get here. It actually was Closer, who's been, I would say, probably their best player most of the split, who looked a little bit off balance in the last weekend. He was the one in the last game who was going in before anyone else with his Jarvan. So I think Golden Glue deserves definitely to be playing in the summer. Golden Guardians aren't looking to, like, every team wants to go to Worlds. Every team wants to win a championship, But I think for Golden Guardians, what they want to do is build a tight unit. And I think of Huhi in the support role, we've seen this before with his CLG team, where CLG in 2016 were never the most talented team. They were never the team that was going to destroy you with raw mechanical skill, but they were smarter and more talented and had better chemistry than everyone else. And they made an MSI final off of that. So I do think if Golden Guardians is like, we're not going to break the bank, we're not going to bring in, a 5-star import, we're not going to, we're going to try to like keep this and make it a chemistry thing, then you don't replace players like crazy. I think Huhi for Keith was acceptable, seeing as Keith wasn't a support player, and Huhi has shown more of an adaptability to that role. But for Golden Guardians, my advice would be to keep this 5 and try to build around this weird chemistry that they have, because these guys are all from around the world. You have FBI from Oceania. Huhi was born in France, South Korea, and now he's an American citizen. It's a random group of people. Turkey with Closer. There's a lot of crazy and it's a melting pot of a team, and I think they do have a weird chemistry about them. And I do want to see these 5 players play another split all together, because they could surprise us. NA is so weak and so bad outside of Cloud9. There's no reason why Golden Guardians can't magically make a final. There is a world where Golden Guardians makes the finals this split, because I have no faith in anyone but C9.
Well, listen.
And I think to that point, right, to the management people involved, the general manager and the assistant Guardians are part of the people who built the current Cloud9 team that scouted Blabber, that scouted Licorice back in the day, right? That made some of those early decisions. And I think that if they've shown anything, they're good at waiting and giving time and letting talent develop. So I think that these players closer in particular, but FBI and Huhi, I think it's time to give them time and let them breathe. And so even, like I said, even if they do lose out in first round of playoffs, which is totally possible, give them time to gel. Don't just make a change.
I think that's very important, to allow a team to gel, and we're going to talk about Team Liquid in a bit, because that was a very big problem for them in Spring Split. But don't lose sight of the fact that Golden Guardians went 0-2 in Week 8, and it looked dire. There was a very small % chance. Chips really had to fall in their favor, and that's exactly what happened, right? They went 2-0, they beat CLG and FlyQuest, then they beat Dig in the tiebreaker, then suddenly they're on a 3-game win streak, and they're riding that into the playoffs. Another team that is riding a lot of momentum, Jacob, is Evil Geniuses. And allow me to just make a point here regarding Jizuke, because I really feel like a lot of this team is succeeding in large part because of how well Jizuke is playing. In the month of March, he has a 16.25 KDA, and he has 4 Player of the Game honors. And he's second he actually leads the LCS this split with that honor with 6. And he was the Player of the Week in Week 8. Very impressive stuff from the Italian Stallion. He's in Italian Stallion mode,
The March of the Stallion. The March of the Stallion. That's exactly what this was.
Well, exactly. And how much do you think that's going to continue in the postseason?
I think, and we'll get to our bracketology later, I think that Evil Genius is going to come out the gate swinging. I think they will meet C9 at least once, and my prediction is in that round 2. For me, the biggest thing, and I don't see him in chat, so I'll say for the VOD. We've had Greg Kim, the LCS director of Evil Geniuses, frequently in Riff Rewind chat, and always gives me a little bit of crap for saying I don't know where to place his team. I think I understand where to place his team now, and it's they are a momentum-based team, and I think you've seen that going into their March, in particular, the last few weeks, riding into the playoffs high, riding into the tiebreaker day yesterday. I think right now the thing is if they start rolling, they roll really fast, and I think that particularly in their first round matchup that they can get to that point against FlyQuest. I don't think they can get to that point against Cloud9 though. That's the thing, is Cloud9 is just such a cut above everyone else that if they do meet Cloud9 in the round 2 part of this playoff, I think that Cloud9 won't even give them the chance to build that momentum in a game winner in a way that they can get that leg up against FlyQuest. But you'll see our brackets later. I know that Emily and Arda have a lot more faith in Evil Geniuses long-term than Tyler and I. We have faith in another team that is in the lower part of the bracket, which I hope will pay off. But nonetheless, I do think that Evil Geniuses really can beat anyone in this playoff bracket except maybe Cloud9.
This team that you're referencing, yes. We'll get to bracketology in a second. Emily, in chat, Tom Shu says teams really need to start targeting Jizuke in the draft. He has a certain pool of champs that he smurfs on. Do you think it's going to be as easy as that for certain teams to just target Jizuke with bans and make sure that he's off his game?
I think when we talk about Jizuke's champ pool, I think it's really important to make the distinction between X player has a really weak champ pool and they only look good on certain champs, and X player looks phenomenal on certain champs and is pretty strong on all others. Because I actually think it's a kind of a misconception that Jizuke has a weak champ pool. But what I do think is that he plays phenomenally well with certain picks. And he also makes it really easy for his team to play around him on certain picks. So in that regard, I think that targeting Jizuke in draft could be a strategy. But I also think that that if Jizuke is able to soak up enough mid lane bans, if people are wanting to do that, especially if EG are on blue side, so their opponent is just target banning Jizuke on red side and not paying attention to a lot of the lane like counter picks that they could be getting. I actually think that's a really good opportunity for EG to kind of really showcase how flexible they can be around their solo laners. Like I think Kumo's improvement has been really good. I think now that both Kumo and Jizuke seem more well coordinated with the team, it allows Svenskeren to kind of open up and transfer pressure where he wants. So if Jizuke is soaking up those bans, I actually think there's a world where EG can use that to their advantage.
Let's talk about some of the teams that failed to make playoffs. You saw one of them there in the B-roll that you just saw, some of the background footage there. Immortals, Tyler, the season slipped away. They have won 3 games since week 4. What on earth happened to this team?
Nothing happened to them. This was always Immortals. I mean, that sounds harsh, but when I looked at Immortals when they were, the second best team in NA, my synopsis of them was they don't play dumb. They beat teams by not doing stupid things. They're a very high floor, very low ceiling team, which means that they had a head start of everyone because they just don't do dumb things. They are all experienced players for the most part, and they might not be the most raw mechanically or they have the best chemistry, but when there was opportunities for, a SOA's backdoor or an Smithy 50-50 Baron steal, they had those little things, those little intangibles that got them farther than their talent could bring them. And I think what we saw is even though NA is a dumpster fire for the most part, the dumpster fire got in front of Immortals. Immortals got passed and lapped by some of these teams with more talent. Look at the EG roster and look at the Immortals roster. It's very clear which roster on paper is more talented. Same with 100 Thieves. Same with a lot of the teams that surpassed them. Maybe Golden Guardians was a surprise, but that team actually improved as the season went along. For Immortals, it seemed like they were stagnant. I don't think week 1 and week 8 Immortals were that different. There wasn't that big of a growth period for anyone on the team. And then while it sucks to point out, I don't know if going to next split, you have Ica, right? And I think out of all the mid laners in the split, he probably performed the worst. He had a lot of expectations on his shoulders coming from, the regional leagues in Europe, being put in place over a guy like DeMonte or a Palafox or a Blaze Olive. And I think going into the offseason, Immortals has to think about, what do you do? Do you back Ica and double down and say, this is our guy, and we are going to ride the year with him because we believe in him? Or do you look at domestic option, like in a Blaze Olive or a Palafox or an Insanity, someone like that? Because it's going to be, for Immortals, there was no growth. They kind of were who they were, and in the first 4 weeks, NA was really dumb and really bad. And at the end of it, NA was still pretty bad, but they got better, while Immortals didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, my intuition is that they're going to double down on Ica. Big fan of Ica for whatever. I have to curb my language on that one because it's so dumbfounding, honestly. I don't understand why, right? Like, dude, but from a playing perspective, there's there's better domestic mid laners, right? They could have gotten a Pobelter at one point over that, right? But there was like this rumor going around that Pobelter just didn't want to play the game. And that's why he ended up on Team Liquid as a coach rather than ending up on a team as a player. And then we saw him come back on CLG and he just wrecked house for a couple of weeks, right? When he first came back. I don't know. I think that the issues with Immortals, to Tyler's point, I don't think anything changed. And I think that they used their experience at one point. They used their experience at one point to sort of dominate's a strong word, but to best people in the league, and like at the end of the day, everyone got better. To his point, and I don't know. I was not a fan of this Immortals put together, other than money and it being the best financial opportunity that Smith had on the table. I had no understanding as to why he chose this over TSM or going back to Liquid and splitting time with Broxa. This just seemed like the like island of misfit toys, and fitting because SOAS was on Misfits last year. That was very similar.
Well, speaking of players that just didn't want to play the game, that leads us to Team Liquid. So many storylines with this team, this split. This is one of the craziest roller coaster rides for any competitive team that personally I've ever covered. Honestly, top 5 Mount Rushmore, most ridiculous seasons, whether it's players, visa issues, even the season going online. So much happened to Team Liquid this split, but the last thing that happened was the team not making the playoffs. So Jacob, is there concern after what happened in the spring split that history might repeat itself in the summer?
Yeah, I think you have to have concern. I think that at this point, nobody can go back on break for this. None of the international players, which is 4/5 international players, but you go back Core JJ or Impact, or you go back to Europe if you're Jensen, you probably aren't coming back. Right? Like the COVID-19 situation is pretty treacherous right now. And I know that that's not why, had nothing to do with why Broxa couldn't get in the first place at the beginning of the split, but certainly would now, right? Like I don't think they're going to let people travel from Europe or Korea if things continue to be as bad as they are. And they just seem to be getting progressively worse with the situation here in the US. So that being said, right? Like it's unfortunate because I think that some people on this team would sort of like have a little bit of a reprieve and mental reprieve of going back home and sort of decompressing. I think that understandably so, that there are people in Liquid that are frustrated with the odds that they were, and I hope that they can surpass that together. And if they can't, I don't think Summer Split's going to be much better either. This team is very talented from a raw playing skill perspective, and I think that they have the opportunity to be one of the best. And that's going to be paramount in this midseason right now, is to figure out how to do that in a world where you cannot decompress outside of North America.
Well, sorry, you mentioned something there. Just let me follow up on that, Emily. My apologies. Are Impact and Core JJ not with the team right now? Did they go back home?
I believe they're still with the team right now.
They're still with the team right now, but the possibility exists that they might be.
There was we talked about this last week, that with the Players Association vote, is that players were told across many different teams that if they wanted to go home, they could.
Okay.
If they didn't want to continue to play the rest of spring, but there is an expectation that they may not be able to come back, because there's a chance that you cannot travel back from South Korea to the United States because of what's going on with the coronavirus. Same can be said for Europe. And so I don't know. It's going to be a big question, right? Like the best thing, in my opinion, the best thing that could happen for Liquid is all those. But that is also the worst thing that could happen for Liquid, because there's a very high probability. So, from a mental perspective, I think going back home and taking a little bit of rest time away in Denmark, Korea would be great, but I don't think they're going to be allowed back in the country if they do that, and so therefore I don't think that they can take that risk, and that's kind of unfortunate because it feels like that's what they need right now, is to decompress.
Emily, let's just assume that the team stays put and they're able to scrim and practice together for the next few weeks until summer. Right now they have this time. Now they finally have their whole team together and they're able to build that chemistry. Is that going to be enough for them to turn things around?
I mean, they have the talent to do so. I think, here's the thing. that they were demotivated, just because it was a really difficult like series of circumstances that were just like incredibly unfortunate for the team, like back to back. I think the big thing for TL for me is how much will that affect them being able to regroup and go into summer? And by that I mean you have this really weird situation where, again, like I can't stress enough the time between spring finals and the start of the summer split, since it was pushed up, is only 3 weeks. So it's a really narrow amount of time. Most people probably won't be traveling due to travel bans, coronavirus concerns. Also, the fact that you would, have to quarantine yourself for 14 days to make sure that you're not symptomatic, all these other things. So the big thing with TL for me is, and again, like I'm not on the team, so I can't say definitively what was going on internally. But if you have a mixture of players who are like trying really hard and a mixture of players that are demotivated, that can be really, really bad for a team. So whoever is on the team just needs to make sure that there isn't any sort of like seeds of resentment from the spring split. And again, like I'm making a lot of presumptions here, so you shouldn't like take my word on this. I'm just saying, as like an outsider, if that was happening, mitigating that and making sure that all of those internal problems are resolved going into practice before the summer split will be incredibly important for this team. That's kind of my point, is just making sure that they actually do have that time to regroup, and hopefully someone is making sure that anything that was going on with the team, if there was, is resolved before they start prepping summer.
I just don't know how. I don't know to the point how it position can make changes right now, right? Like it's
they
particularly
can't. I mean, the window
it's particularly
is just
unfortunate.
so short.
But it also, right, like Liquid lives in apartments. Do you really just like want to be shacked up in apartments? You're in mid-split, but you have no choice. Like LA is in a stay-at-home order, right?
It doesn't matter. If it's your job, then you're gonna do it, right? Like
yeah, but my point is like how are I don't know, like how are you going to decompress if you're in this position, right? Like, and it is unfortunate.
I wrote an article recently that just came out today about how teams are dealing with it. But yeah,
which you can find at ESPN.com/esports.
I do think that's an excellent point, though, because like it's weird because the LCS is continuing, right? And so we think like, oh my gosh, like this is a window of opportunity for esports or whatever. And at the very least, they have the fact that there's competition to, like keep them distracted from what's going on in the world, right? Like you at least have a job that you can go to and you can show up. But at the same time, like if I'm not from the US and I know, for example, that the situation in the US is significantly worse in LA than it is, say, in my home country, and I could get better healthcare there, or I have friends and family that I'm worried about there. Like these are all like really valid concerns of players. And additionally, like teams aren't going to make changes. They are all going to be stuck in apartments. They are all going to be self-isolating. So this is kind of an unprecedented situation for not just TL, but like the entire league.
Yeah.
Let's talk, Emily, before we go on to Bracketology. Cloud9, 17-1, only lose to TSM. How do we look back on this season?
I mean, I talked to Niski, who I've already said, like, spoilers is my MVP vote for this year. I said it last week when we talked about it, or not this year, this split. I said it last week when we talked about it, so it shouldn't come as a shock. But I talked to him about this, and to his point, he told me that, it shouldn't, like, it will be weird not to be playing for stage games and having, like, an audience for playoffs. And for me, myself, outside of talking to Niski, I'm very curious to see what Riot's going to do and how they're going to try to, like, imbue playoffs with that same kind of, grandeur that they typically do with their video packages and having an arena and stuff like that. But to Niski's point, like, he made the point that, most of their games were on stage. And C9 had already qualified for first place prior to any of the self-isolation stuff happening and having it be a work order. So I think when you look back at this C9 split, I still think you have to take that into consideration. The thing that I think could be a knock in their favor isn't actually the online performance, but what you think of NA as a whole and their strength this year compared to, say, the strength of North America during the 2016 TSM summer split.
So we should clarify that he's definitely our MVP
He's my MVP.
choice. Yeah, he's our MVP here on Rift Rewind. As we get into our playoff brackets, let's talk bracketology. So the playoff format is a little bit different this year, as you are all aware, in the LCS. 6 teams from the spring season participate. Top 4 teams play in the winner's bracket. 5th and 6th play in the loser's bracket. It's a double elimination. The first seed picks between 3rd and 4th seed in round 1. That means that Cloud9 selected 100 Thieves as their opponent, and the winner qualifies for the 2020 midseason invitational. We'll get further information on what exactly is going to be happening in the future as it pertains to what's going to go online, etc. And of course Worlds as we roll around in the summer schedule, etc. But let's focus on this right now, the playoff bracket. There it is right there. Cloud 900 Thieves. Let's start with that. C9 controls the season series, obviously 2-0. They beat them in week 2 and week 8. As Emily mentioned, those were on LAN. 7-3 Cloud9 series total. The last time 100 Thieves beat Cloud9 was June 2019. That was week 4 of the summer split. 100 Thieves is a developing team, though, Tyler. How can they pose a challenge to Cloud9 in the playoffs?
While I think this is going to be battle top 2 top laners in the versions today, Someday might be the only player who might make the first team all-pro team over anyone on C9. So I think Licorice and Someday kind of are going to have a little bit of a battle to see who really is the best top laner in the league. The only way 100 Thieves win this series is if Someday pops off. If Someday can get going as he has sometimes in this split, then I can possibly see 100 Thieves taking a game or two. But I think overall, I think this is a quick 3-0, 3-1. But Someday, he is one of the best players in the league, and you have to respect talent like that. So Someday versus Licorice is my matchup to watch, but C9 should win this comfortably.
How in what world could 100 Thieves defeat C9 in a best of 5?
Someday just has to carry hard. He literally just has to play around Someday, and everyone around that top lane and get Someday the resources he's needed to carry, as we've seen throughout the season. He gets a lot of gold from the team. He's probably one of the most prioritized top laners in the entire world when it comes to gold and creep resources. So 100 Thieves really need to go behind and kind of push Someday out into that open and really have him carry, because we've seen sometimes this split, if the only player on C9 who's really had some, hiccups has been Licorice. He's had some games where he has looked a little bit off balance. So if Someday can, get a solo kill in game 1 and maybe steal game 1 and then, kind of snowball that into Someday kind of just reigning over the entire series, maybe they can win, but C9 should win this series. Someday is the X factor, though.
Now, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I was going to save this question from chat for later, but this one is from You're Not So Good, Jacob, that says, can you please explain to me how it is in any way possible not to vote for Someday as your MVP? He, in my opinion, at least, is almost the sole reason for 100 Thieves getting a 2nd or 3rd place tiebreaker with a bottom 3 mid laner who has improved, though, is what he's saying there. So if we go back to last week, Jacob, we were talking about what's the definition of MVP, either being the best player or the most valuable to your team. Based on that latter definition, would Someday at least get some consideration around the voters?
I think he totally should, but he's got really stiff competition, right? I think fair amount of votes, respectively. But I also think Power of Evil and FlyQuest gets a lot of votes for the same reason Someday does, right? Relative team contributions, particularly in the second half of the split. I think that, I don't know, like Someday wouldn't necessarily be my vote, but it's hard not to acknowledge his competition and contribution to 100 Thieves and sort of their surge in the second part of the split, particularly in the last few weeks as they've qualified for playoffs and taken this higher seed. But the thing is like we all know how MVPs work, and it's usually team. And that will probably be Niski or Sven. I mean, Sven was my prediction last week. I think Niski is Emily's. It will probably be a Cloud9 player, but like I think you can make fair arguments for Someday and Power of Evil both.
I think you can definitely make the point that without those players, including, like you said, Power of Evil, those teams would be a lot worse for wear. So if that's your definition, they definitely belong in the conversation. Where FlyQuest belong is in the postseason against Evil Geniuses, Emily. EG is actually 2-0 in the season series. Week 3 and Week 7, they were able to dispatch FlyQuest. I mean, Evil Geniuses is riding high right now. If there is one team that has all the momentum going into the postseason, it is Evil Geniuses. Who do you give the edge to in this one?
I am giving the edge to EG. I think FlyQuest, in terms of what I'm looking at from their team, it is typically how their mid jungle is going to transfer that pressure to the rest of the map. So it's a lot more of a core focus and seeing where Santorin is going to go, top, mid, or bot. And then additionally, Power of Evil, to Jacob's point, has been playing really, really well this split. And he's been one of the main factors behind a lot of FlyQuest's success. I think that EG are in a better position now for a few reasons. One, they seem to have really figured out, again, I mentioned how they play around both of their solo lanes, how they really want to spread people on the map, how even if it's not necessarily executed the best, they do want to end up running a 1-3-1 or 4-1 against some of these teams. And a lot of North American teams have a little bit of difficulty dealing with that. NARAM is, half joke, half unfortunately true. So I think the big thing is, like, we're looking at mid priority, we're looking at how EG play their side waves, and I just think that EG should be able to transfer the momentum and kind of how they've unlocked Kumo, how Jizuke has stepped up and they've really focused on putting him on things that he can split on, and again, it opens up Svenskeren. And I talked about this earlier, we were talking about EG, so that's the main reason why I'm putting them over FlyQuest. I think early on the split and continuing, I really do like that FlyQuest have a really strong identity around how they want to initiate fights and skirmishes and how they want to be scrappy and how they want to transfer PoE's mid-pressure into a lot of smaller skirmishes, especially around mid lane, to try to pick off their opponents. But I don't think it always works. And I also think that sometimes that kind of play style, as we've seen across multiple regions, can actually end up hurting you if you continuously pick fights in a deficit, especially if the opposing team can spread you on the map. So that's why I give the edge to EG.
All right, we did our bracketology for the LEC earlier in the show. Now let's do it for the LCS. Jacob, let's start with you. Give us your filled out bracket.
Yeah, so I think that Cloud9 will be at 100 Thieves. I know some of us thought that would be very one-sided. Pull it out against C9 at least one game. I mean, not the C9 wins that one 3-1. I think that Evil Geniuses isn't going to be incredible. Emily's point, I do think that their surge is really notable right now, and I think that they are rolling. And then that would mean that FlyQuest plays Golden Guardians. I think FlyQuest beats Golden Guardians pretty handedly in a 3-1. I think that TSM is going to beat 100 Thieves, actually. TSM, Tyler and I, as we alluded to earlier in the show, we for TSM. I think TSM is a playoff team, man. I think that they are someone who has a lot of experience, that this will convert quite well. So I think that TSM is going to be the one that runs it. I think that they can beat both FlyQuest and 100 Thieves. I think that they can also beat Evil Geniuses in that semifinal match before they, or I guess losers final, whatever you want to call it. I'll call it the losers final. And then I think that we'll get a C9 TSM final of old, and we will see C9 win that. But I do think that TSM, if they can beat 100 Thieves, I think that they can beat anybody in the lower bracket, because I think 100 Thieves and Evil Geniuses show that they are a cream of the crop right now. But I do believe in TSM and their experience and their ability to win some playoff games.
Of course, experience. Bjergsen with that mustache looking like Dr. Bjergsen Specht will be rallying the troops. Tyler, why do you agree with this as we look at Tyler's bracket?
I agree with it because everyone in NA 9, and then when looking like which redhead stepchild you want to bring on the family vacation like the most, it's like I really don't have a strong feeling about any of them. But when I really when I look at the peaks of every team left outside of C9, TSM's the only one who's had games where I'm like, wow, when they put everything together, they are actually a contender against C9. Same with Team Liquid. Those three teams for me have played at a peak level where I'm like, okay, I think they could do something maybe on the international stage. For TSM, it's been, maybe 1-2 games a split where they've really reached their full potential, and I'm banking on that full potential. If in this format where we've had some teams don't have their mind on the prize, right? Some teams are looking towards the offseason. Some teams are thinking about Valorant. Some teams are thinking, I don't want to play the spring playoffs. I want this to be over. I don't think Bjergsen will let anyone on his team let down. Bjergsen wants to win. He doesn't care if it's online, offline, in a farm, in an arena. It can be in front of no one. No one could ever know they won, but he will want to win it because he wants to win more than anything. So if I'm going to put money on someone making it to the finals versus C9, it's going to be TSM and Bjergsen, because when the chips are down and everyone else doesn't look that solid and they all have holes, I'm going to go with the team where I think they have the highest peak and the leader who is most dedicated to getting them there.
Convincing arguments there, but Emily and I do not agree. Emily, let's take a look at your bracket.
So I actually agree with some of Tyler's assessment about TSM. Like, I won't be shocked to see if TSM make it. I obviously didn't pick them, as you can see from my bracket. Every time I've picked TSM, they have let me down, and they have, it just seems like, again, I know I used the phrase like the platonic ideal of this TSM team like 2 weeks ago. I think they have a really good setup in terms of how they could play, and like the ideal scenario for them, right? Going topside, transferring that pressure while Bjergsen's holding mid. I think this team can do it, but they've just been so inconsistent, and they have been torn in opposing directions where it's like, are we scaling to late? What is our mid game looking like? We're not pushing our advantages that we did get early from Dardox jungling and from getting Broken Blade those advantages topside. And I think based on that, their actual performance, especially after this past week, it's really difficult for me to believe in TSM, despite the fact that, again, I will not be shocked if TSM makes the finals. I really won't, because I do think a really strong performing TSM is the only team in North America that can go and knock out C9. The reason why I did pick EG, though, again, is to go back to a lot of my points. I think as late as like 3 weeks ago, I was saying that I have no idea what the team identity for this EG team is supposed to be. They just seem really uncoordinated, despite the fact that they have a lot of really great pieces in place. And I think to go back to like the ideal EG play style right now, how are we splitting our pressure with our solo laners? We can put Bang on something that he's really comfortable with. That scales. We know he's going to show up in team fights. And that is like kind of the ideal look at what this team can do. And I think EG has slowly, A, realized that, and B, steadily improved on that week to week to week. And that's what I want to see from them going into playoffs. And that's the reason why I picked EG, just because coming into this playoff bracket, they're looking a lot more solid in terms of what their team identity wants to be.
Let's end on my bracket. I agree with Emily. I think Evil Geniuses make it all the way to the finals, and they give Cloud9 a tough time as well. Exactly. 2 3-2 games for Evil Geniuses. I think they give them a tough time. I believe that is Sager in the background, Jacob, that agrees with me wholeheartedly. And thank you, Sager, for your vote of confidence. I'm sure that Doris also agrees. That's Jacob's dog and cat, by the way. Yeah, Emily, go ahead.
I was going to say, Arda, I want to ask you about the Golden Guardians pick. More than I want to ask you about the Evil Geniuses pick. I'm really curious to see why you had Golden Guardians going so far.
I think Golden Guardians turned it on at the right time. They're on a 3-game win streak. Things fell. I believe in momentum, okay? I believe in momentum. I think that this team has shown flashes of brilliance throughout the season. You guys mentioned it earlier about Closer being one of the star players on this team.
Has nothing to do with them having a Turkish jungler.
No, not whatsoever. Otherwise, I would have picked.
I would have missed that connection, but
if that's the case, if that was the case, I would have picked TSM to win it all and been like, "Hey, Broken Blade is my MVP." That's what I would have said, right? But I do think that they gel well. I think that we're not giving Golden Glue enough due because I think that this team has really found its stride. I think that they're bringing in momentum. That's why I picked Evil Geniuses to make it all the way to the final, because I believe in momentum, and I believe that people get themselves into the right mindset. And Golden Guardians, after all the chips that fell the way that they did, you can't be off a high going into playoffs in that kind of situation. So on that note, that's the reason why. But we got to run here. We got to go on the Rift Rewind. Thank you very much for joining us, Tyler, Emily, and Jacob. Don't forget, we have a Throwback Thursday watch-along IPL 5 on Thursday night. Emily has the LPL program on Friday night, and Jacob debuted a Counter-Strike program on Monday nights. If you're a Counter-Strike fan, the Eco is on Monday nights. He had 2 formidable guests. Go watch the VOD. They're all available at youtube.com/ESPN Esports. And of course, all of our written stuff is at espn.com/esports. Thank you very much for watching us here on the Rift Rewind every single Tuesday night. We'll catch you next week.